Hello students, and welcome to my discussion on correcting errors in property, plant, and equipment. Let's get started, first of all, with a goal. Our goal is to learn to correct errors regarding property, plant, and equipment, recognizing from the get-go that the correcting entry amounts are going to change depending on when the error is discovered. Let's come up with some facts to a problem that bring that to bear. Our facts tell us that we purchased some equipment for $10,000 that had a 5-year life. No residual value was depreciated over 5 years using straight line depreciation. The purchase was mistakenly recorded as supplies expense. And let's just assume that happened 3 years ago. So, first, let's see what the entry was and what it should have been. So what the entry should have done was to debit equipment, the asset, and credit cash. But what the entry actually was to debit supplies expense and cash. So cash was okay, but the error lies in the equipment account and supplies expense. And remember, supplies expense is closed at the end of each year, and so the amount's no longer in the supplies account because we said that this mistakenly happened 3 years ago. Making a mistake 3 years ago doesn't give you permission to make another mistake. So our goal then needs to be to correct what's wrong on the balance sheet. And the reason we need to correct balance sheet accounts is the expense happened 3 years ago, so we really can't affect an expense account on this year's income statement. So our first job needs to be to figure out what balance sheet accounts are wrong and what their correct amounts should be. Let's do a little bit of a time diagram to help us with that. Here's a time chart that shows what should have happened with depreciation expense. In the year that we purchased it, which was 3 years ago, we should have taken depreciation expense of $2,000. In the second year, we should have taken depreciation expense. And recall we said that our error was captured in year 3. It doesn't matter where in year 3 the error was captured. It could have been the first day or the last day, but we need to correct the balances at the beginning of year 3 and then show year 3 correctly, because making an expense 3 years ago doesn't give us permission to make an expense again. So what should have been an accumulated depreciation at this point would have been $2,000 for year 1. Guess we should title this, huh? Accumulated depreciation should have $2,000 for year 1 and $2,000 for year 2. So at the beginning of the period we discovered the error, accumulated depreciation should have $4,000 in it. Given we know all of this, we can go about making our correcting entry now. What would that look like? Keep in mind that I want to correct the balance sheet accounts. So the first thing I'm going to do is to record an equipment purchase, because equipment has not yet been recorded. So I'm going to debit equipment for the $10,000 in the balance sheet account that should be there. And according to my little chart, I need to put $4,000 in accumulated depreciation for year 1 and year 2, bringing that account balance correct as of beginning of year 3. So what's the remaining credit? The amount that needs to fix this for $6,000. Now recall that supplies expense was closed into retained earnings, dropping it by $10,000. So it would have been $10,000 to retain earnings at the beginning of the first year, but then $2,000 worth of depreciation happened, so that drops the amount to retain earnings to $8,000, and then 2 more happened, was also closed into retained earnings, so we're now down to $6,000. So the difference needs to be taken to retained earnings in the amount of $6,000. That amount changes depending on what year you find the error. We found it in year 3. Keep in mind that you have to change that amount to be correct for the period of time that you found it. Now there's one more thing that we need to do for 2003. Can you think of what that is? We need to do our regular adjusting entry for depreciation expense for year 3. So depreciation expense will be recorded when we do all of our adjusting entries. And notice it's $2,000. And then I'll also credit accumulated depreciation for $2,000. When I do that, accumulated depreciation is at the correct amount for year 3. Depreciation expense is at the correct amount for year 3. And retained earnings is at the correct amount for year 3. So between my first entry and my second entry, I've corrected the balance sheet accounts and I've shown the current year correctly. Keep in mind that the entry to retained earnings is an error correction and would be adjusting the beginning balance of retained earnings as a prior period adjustment. Thanks for joining me on this discussion of how to record correcting entries as they relate to property, plant, and equipment.